welcome everybody to the August installment of our OSHA webinar series. I've given up trying to count the number of webinars that we've done because we've done more than one per month as events warrant. But this is a new one for us. If you're a fan of the series and you've been joining us for the last 4+ years, you know that we did a deep dive into the Lockout Tagout standard back in, I think, early 2018. I joined the firm in January of 2018, and one of the first webinars I did was with Eric Kahn. We did our top 5 reasons why lockout matters and why you need to get it in the most common mistakes that employers make. And if you remember from that program, one of the 5 most frequently misunderstood or misapplied portions of the lockout standard deals with periodic inspections. And in the years since, and certainly in more inspections than I can count, we've run into employers, in many cases, sophisticated employers, folks that have really good safety programs, have really good lockout tagout programs, still not getting periodic inspections quite right. I think a lot of that has to do with the standard itself. It's confusing. It's not really clear. You've got the LOTO directive. You've got the standard interpretations letters that kind of talk about and assess the various aspects of periodic inspections. But I'm always amazed that even in dealing with compliance officers who seem to know a good bit about lockout, some of the things that I hear and I'm told about, what our client or employer should or should not be doing with respect to periodic inspections doesn't square with my understanding of the standard, and we have to set them right or explain this or that and correct them. I get lots of occasional clients that certainly misunderstand aspects of it, so we felt that this was a good piece to really drill down and focus specifically just on periodic inspections, and with the hope that when you come out of this program, assuming you're still awake, that we'll try our best to keep your interest, that you'll be able to go back to your companies and take a close look at how and when you're doing periodic inspections and making sure you're doing them in a way that if you are subject to an inspection, particularly one where the compliance officer knows lockout tagout, maybe is really focused on periodic inspections, that you'll come out on the right end of that inspection. And I can one thing I'd add, I have noticed, at least in a lot of the lockout focused inspections that I've worked on in the past year or so, as we're getting back to kind of more normal inspections, in-person inspections, as COVID kind of hopefully continues to fade, is that there's really been an emphasis, certainly here where I sit, and do a brief bio introduction in a second, in Chicago. A lot of manufacturing, the area offices really do seem to focus on periodic inspections. I think in large part that's because the periodic inspection is the way that OSHA expects employers to ensure that your written LOTO procedures are correct, right, and that they're being applied correctly. So if you're not doing periodic inspections, in their mind, you're not finding and fixing the potential problems with your procedures. So with that, just some quick introductions. I'm Aaron Gelb. I lead the firm's Midwest OSHA practice. I'm based in Chicago. I've been in Chicago for the past, 23 years. Before that, spent about 4 years in St. Louis at a firm down there. And really devote pretty much the bulk of my practice to OSHA, occupational safety and health, dealing primarily with the area offices here in Illinois, particularly in Chicago, Peoria, but also throughout the Midwest and beyond. We had originally planned I was going to be joined by one of our associates, but something came up and she was no longer able to join us. But I am thrilled to share that we will be joined by Tabitha Thompson, who is a very valued safety consultant that we use on a regular basis. So Tabitha, I'll let you introduce yourself and then we can get started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Aaron. I'm Tabitha Thompson. I'm a senior advisor with FDR Safety. We are based out of Franklin, Tennessee, just south of Nashville. I have been with FDR Safety a little over 2 years. Prior to that, I worked with Tennessee OSHA, which is a state plan. I was the health compliance manager. I worked for Tennessee for about 10 years as a compliance manager as well as a compliance officer. I'm a certified industrial hygienist and a certified safety professional. I work with clients on specialized issues such as lockout, tagout, machine guarding, and atmospheric hazards.
Thank you. And to in fact, I think one of the reasons why when we had to find another speaker, that Tabitha was my first choice, was that she and I have worked quite closely on several clients on developing or improving their lockout programs, and particularly helping clients with the periodic inspection process. So I thought this was just a perfect fit. So what we're going to really try to do, just and we're going to go over kind of the basics of periodic inspections. What is a periodic inspection? Why they matter? Kind of similar approach that we took in our prior lockout tagout webinar, and then focus on 5 of the common mistakes that we see folks making with respect to the periodic inspection requirement. Then we'll transition and focus a light on grouping of procedures, for the purpose of periodic inspections. And Tabitha is going to go over some compliance tips and best practices. And I think Tabitha, your perspective, both as someone who inspected and issued citations, as well as now someone who works with employers to help them avoid those citations, will be particularly valuable. So just just to orient everyone to the basics, right? I mean, I know y'all can read the standard and all that, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, just kind of starting out with the standard itself, right? That the 147C6I requires that employers conduct periodic inspections of their energy control procedures at least annually to ensure that the procedure and requirements are being followed. Now, when you dig into the, it's sad to say that I've spent a good deal of time reading the preamble of the LOTO standard, and there's a whole section on periodic inspections. It kind of gets into what the purpose of them, why when OSHA was developing the lockout tagout standard that it included this requirement in there, right? The way I look at it, in my interpretation of the preamble, and one of the things that OSHA said is, because of essentially the potential gravity of harm if people are not locking out as they're supposed to do, that you need to be doing periodic inspections to ensure or to communicate or convey to the employees the importance of locking out. So in essence, part of the requirement here is or the expectation is, by doing this, by inspecting your procedures, by observing people carrying them out, and making sure that they're doing them correctly, that's letting them know that they need to be using them, right? They need to be following the procedures. And so there is just kind of, by the act of doing them, you're accomplishing something. What you're supposed to be accomplishing then is, from my perspective and the standard, really 3 things. That you're ensuring that the procedure itself works, that it effectively controls the potential sources of hazardous energy. Kind of put it in very simplistic terms, that it makes sure that if the machine is slicing and dicing, that it makes sure the slicer and the dicer are no longer doing that. So if someone is performing servicing and maintenance, that they know that they can safely enter into the potential danger zones and they will not be hurt by the machinery. So the procedure is effective. Second is to ensure that the employees understand the procedure, right? And that they know how to apply it. So you're really looking at two things: is, does the procedure work? And do the people who use the procedure understand it? And if you do those things, then you've essentially successfully completed a periodic inspection. In section A of the requirement of the standards of 147C6IA states that periodic inspections shall be performed by an authorized employee other than the ones utilizing the procedure being inspected. So that means that the observer cannot be carrying out the procedure. The observer needs to be an authorized employee who is then observing another authorized employee. And this is one of the requirements that, or the elements of the standard that as I referenced earlier, I had a compliance officer telling me, like, no, that means that it can't be someone from that department. It can't be someone from that area. It has to be somebody who doesn't apply that procedure. And, we had to go to the standard and go kind of take a deep dive with this compliance officer and eventually help them see that that what this section of the standard is simply saying is that the person who's observing needs to be doing that. They need to be observing. They can't be the one that's actually carrying out the procedure. It can be someone from that department. It can be someone who does typically apply that procedure. They just have to be observing and not participating in the locking out or carrying out of that procedure. The second piece is then that the inspections shall be conducted to correct any deviations or inadequacies that are identified in the process of that observation. So again, that is, as I said earlier, that's the point of making sure that the procedure works. And if in the course of observing the authorized employee carrying it out, the slicer doesn't stop slicing or the procedure is determined to be unclear, then the point of that is to make sure that it's addressed and corrected through whatever means you have in place to do that. And then the third part that I think is perhaps the most overlooked or misunderstood part is that in addition to having an authorized employee observe another authorized employee carry out the procedure, that there then must be a review between the inspector and each authorized employee of their responsibilities under the energy control procedure that's being inspected. In other words, you need to make sure, while you don't have to observe each and every employee carrying out that procedure, you need to observe a representative sample, and we can kind of talk about what that means, because it's not a clear concept necessarily. Is that then everybody who is likely to be carrying out that procedure in the coming year needs to participate in some sort of review, right? And this is, keep in mind, it's a performance-oriented standard, which means that OSHA does not prescribe specifically how you accomplish this. There are a number of different ways to do it, but ultimately, it's I think, at least my experience, a lot of folks will have a group meeting, a classroom presentation type format where various procedures that those folks are likely to be carrying out are reviewed, maybe put up on the screen and discussed. It's an opportunity for someone to raise their hand and say, hey, when I did this procedure the other day, this didn't work. This part of it didn't work, or this energy source wasn't controlled. Or I have a question. I don't understand how to do this. And then that can be addressed. And then everything and it's communicated and socialized to everybody else in that group. I'll stop there for a second. Tabitha, do you have any thoughts or recommendations as far as accomplishing this piece of the periodic inspection requirement? Since it does seem to be, in my experience, something that folks, I find more often that employers do a pretty good job of having the observation take place, but I see probably more often that this part is not done.
Yeah, Aaron, so I think it's important that people understand that if you have a large group of authorized employees, that, like you said, that they have to be communicated. So a lot of times we recommend that they do this in a group setting. If they have a meeting set up, they do like a pre-shift meeting every morning, that they do that. They use their that meeting for their lockout tagout periodic review that they did in that area where these authorized employees were. That's a good way to do this. And then document that in a sign-in sheet, because that's where a lot of times we find they're not doing that. They're not documenting that they've done this with employees and having that communication. And then obviously, as you said, they don't have to do it between each employee, but they do have to communicate that. So then finding that right number of what percentage of employees should they be doing their reviews with is also key. You know, you don't want to do 5 employees when you have 500 authorized employees in your facility. That's not going to be a representative number.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this portion of the standard, I mean, usually when we're dealing with citations for failing to comply with the periodic inspection section of the standard, it's usually just written under C6I. Sometimes I've seen A or B, maybe that the person, you might see it under A because the person who did the observation was not an authorized employee. As Tabitha and I were talking, some employers kind of do it as a really check the box type exercise. They'll just send anybody out there to do the observations. Or maybe it's someone who is not authorized, and so that's an easy citation to write. I've seen just a handful in my career that are based specifically on C, and I think part of that is because the majority of the inspections that I've dealt with that deal with lockout, usually the request is, let's say it's an accident related inspection. They ask for the training records of the injured employee. They ask for the procedure that they were using or should have been using, and then they'll ask for a periodic inspection of that procedure. And hopefully you have one of that employee who had been injured, and that's usually where it stops. If you have that periodic inspection form showing that person had been observed and evaluated on the use of that procedure, I would say in 85 to 90% of the inspections that I work on, I don't get a follow-up request for additional information or additional documents. But what does happen sometimes is, again, if you get a compliance officer who is knowledgeable or for whatever reason there are greater concerns about the overall efficacy of the employer's lockout program, then you start seeing requests like, how did you comply with this portion? What did you do to communicate or review it with all the other employees, or provide all the periodic inspections for everybody in that department? And that's where you then kind of get into, what if you haven't done enough of that, or what if certain number of people were missed for whatever reason because they were out when you were doing the periodic inspections, etc. The last piece, which I've not yet dealt with in an inspection, is under C6 ID, which is an additional requirement if you're using Tagout, is to include in that review also a discussion about the limitation of tags. But I don't think we need to spend much time focusing on that. If anyone has questions about Tagout, we can address those at the end of the program. The other pieces then, don't forget, of course, to certify that you complete. If you're doing the periodic inspections, please make sure you're documenting those. Obviously, I think lawyers, we are required by law to mention the importance of documentation in every presentation we give. It certainly seems like that, right? And that's because it's a super easy citation for a compliance officer to write, and essentially a very difficult one for us to defend if there's no document. Can't really comply with the certification requirement if there's no document to produce. And so and I see it more often than I wish, where either there is no document at all, or the document is lacking certain required elements that are set forth in the standard. So to comply with C6II, you need to identify the machinery or equipment that the procedure is used on, the date that the periodic inspection was done, the employees who were involved in the inspection, and the person who then performed the inspection, the observer. So make sure you got first and last names, you've got the year, the full dates, etc. So you can make sure that you comply. It'd be a shame to be doing periodic inspections and be cited for not documenting them. And then last but not least, it's under the training section, but it still is part, in my view, kind of, it certainly ties in directly with the periodic inspection requirement that is under C7 IIIB, to make sure that you do retraining for people if the periodic inspection reveals that either the employee is not following the inspection, following the procedure, or that their knowledge of the procedure is lacking, right? And I see that from time to time. Most fortunately, I think clients generally do a pretty good job in this regard. Certainly, if you have a highly functioning safety program, right? If the person who is the observer, you're setting out to observe a procedure being performed, hopefully you know that if the person who is performing it isn't doing it correctly, they need to be retrained to ensure that they do in fact understand the procedure and how to apply it. All right, so we'll just briefly, I don't want to spend too much time talking about why periodic inspections matter. I think I've talked about a little bit, and I certainly talked about the first point, right? Due to the significant risks that are associated with either not following procedures or having a procedure that is inadequate, right? That it doesn't control all the hazardous sources of energy. Perhaps one of the sources of energy is omitted, or turns out that folks don't know exactly how to control it, how to dissipate it, how to verify that it's been effectively controlled. Hopefully you're finding and fixing all those things by doing a periodic inspection. So again, that is why I think OSHA places such a high value, has been focusing so much on the periodic inspection requirement, because it is the way that employers can show that they're taking the necessary steps. Additionally, again, goes without saying, if you haven't documented the periodic inspections, if you're not doing them, it's a pretty easy citation for a compliance officer to write. The initial serious citation can go as high as $14,502. The bigger problem is, of course, and you hear us talk about this pretty frequently in our webinars, right? The real hazard or the real risk here is a repeat. Particularly if you have a large facility, or if you have multiple facilities in federal states within federal OSHA's jurisdiction, the risk of if you're caught having not done a periodic inspection or having done it correctly in one facility, they come back to that facility either for a follow-up inspection, or there's an accident, they show up at another inspection. It's really easy to fail to miss an inspection of one procedure or a certain number of employees, or not document it. So I think this is one of the requirements that is, because there is this annual component, right? It's not like writing a procedure or developing a program. Once you develop a program, you've got it. Once you write the procedure, assuming it's accurate, it's there. So you have a greater ability to control and prevent repeat citations for things like that. Even training, right? You can pretty much make sure, I hope, that people receive their authorized or affected employee training when they start. A requirement like this that has an annual component, something that must be done each and every year, and you've got a large facility with hundreds of procedures, the risk of a repeat is very high. So I always place a real emphasis on let's try to avoid ever getting that first periodic inspection citation, so you don't have to worry about the repeat. If you look in terms of another reason why, again, this is important, I talked earlier, this is one of the most frequently cited sections of the lockout standard. Kind of the usual suspects, if you will. C4, written procedures, most frequently cited, followed by failure to train under C7, and failing to do or do them correctly. The periodic inspections is the third most frequently cited portion or section of the standard. And then I think, probably most importantly, putting aside regulatory risk, is if you're not doing periodic inspections and your procedures have holes in them, they're flawed, you're far less likely to catch them, right? The whole point of the periodic inspection, again, I've said it a couple of times already, is to find them, find the problems, fix them before you find out about them because somebody gets hurt. All right, so switching gears again to talk a little bit about the 5 most common mistakes that we see employers make, and then we'll kind of shift gears from the negatives of the mistakes and the errors to best practices and kind of proactive steps that Tabitha will take you all through in a second. So step one, one of the most common mistakes, failing to do the periodic inspections when you're required to do them. And I know this sounds simplistic, and maybe some of you are going to be, well, that's not even possible. But first, make sure that you actually implement or carry out the procedure when you're doing the periodic inspection. What do I mean by that is you actually have to lock out the asset or the piece of equipment when you're doing the periodic inspection. I've had employers tell me that they thought it was really more of a paperwork exercise, that we're just supposed to review the procedure and make sure that it reads correctly and that it will work. No, you actually have to lock it out. And I'm sure some of you are saying, I can't believe he's saying that. Like, of course I do that, but I'll just say that not everybody does or has done that. So that's why we're covering that. Make sure you do it every 12 months, right? It's an annual requirement, but that does not mean it's a calendar year requirement. Same thing. I'm always a little bit reluctant to say some of these things because I think some people are going to think I'm either making it up or no, that's not possible. But I've had folks tell me, no, that it says annually, and to me, annual means every year. And so if I do it on January 1st of 2021, I can do it on December 31st of 2022, and I'll have complied with the standard. Then I'll pull out the LOTO directive or an interpretation letter, and I'll set them straight. But that may be after they've already gotten a citation. So it's got to be done on every 12 months on a rolling basis. A couple other things that procedures that are not required to be documented under C4I still need to be inspected. If you have a procedure that you use less than once a year, based on that 12-month interval, it only needs to be inspected when used. Of course, that assumes that you've got confidence in your people and your controls, that someone will know to inspect it, when it is used. So I'd be reluctant to rely on that. If I had concerns about a safety program, I'd probably still want to include that in the review, unless you were confident in your people that they know this is a procedure that has to be inspected when used. Maybe it's written on the procedure, but there are different ways to ensure that takes place. Third, develop and follow a plan. The preamble and the LOTO directive make clear, as I said before, it's a performance-oriented standard. It's up to you to decide how best within your organization to comply with this requirement. You can choose to do random audits. Then you just have to keep track of which procedures have been evaluated and which employees have participated or been observed. Some folks do it through plant safety tours. Others do it through kind of planned visual observations. Others will shut the plant down for a day or two and just kind of do a periodic inspection palooza. I'll turn to you for a quick second again, Tabitha. Do you have any, again, I think a lot of it depends on the employer and their operations. Do you have any methods that you find work best or that your clients prefer over others?
A lot of times they rely on doing so many on a monthly basis, or they do certain areas on a monthly basis. They say, okay, we're going to do, we have 6 different areas, and each area we're going to designate, we're going to do this grouping of lockout tagout procedures in January, and then we're going to do this grouping in February. And so that way they cycle through all their facility, and then they keep them all in a spreadsheet form so that they can keep up with them, so they don't miss any. In addition to that, I'd like to comment on the ones that don't have to be documented, the ones that are like single source. Highly recommend that you document all those in the facility that you have that don't need written procedures, so that you can keep track of those, since they do have to be inspected.
Great. Yeah, I think ultimately it really comes down to whatever approach you choose, given the number of procedures and the number of employees that need to participate, right, it really requires organization and a plan. And it can't be something that's kind of done on an ad hoc basis, or we'll get around to it, or we'll wait till the end of the year and we'll do all of this. That's just leaving too much to chance, in my view.
Yeah, and Aaron, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I wouldn't do it like a lot of people say, well, we're going to do it in October is our slow month, and we shut down a lot of our operations. That's usually not a good plan unless you're a super small facility and you have very few procedures, because what ends up happening is people take time off, or they have other things you're going on that's going on, and then they don't actually get that done, and then you miss your annual periodic review because you don't get it done in that 1 month that you've designated.
Right. Yeah. Or that's like you said, that's the month that the person who gets injured 3 months later, they were off that month. And so they were the 1 or 2 only people who didn't participate in the periodic inspection. And now you don't have a record of them, participating because you handled that way. Another common mistake, having the wrong people participate in the inspection. Right. So I talked a little bit about this. Again, the inspection must be performed by an authorized employee other than the one that's using the procedure. So that is, the inspector has to be authorized, obviously, and the person being observed is an authorized employee who's carrying it out. So make sure that the right people are participating, and make sure if you're relying on, third parties to assist with this process. I know from experience, we've had clients that have been, told by, and I wouldn't say they're safety consultants, but companies that maybe develop procedures or revise procedures, that offer services that not entirely clear, but are implied to be that they fully comply with with either the lockout tagout standard fully or the periodic inspection requirement. So I guess I'd just say, if it sounds too good to be true, you need to be careful about, if you're using outside parties to do the periodic inspections, that is likely, not going to work unless you authorize that consultant to do the inspections. Anything to add there, Tabitha?
Yes. So I 100% agree with Aaron on that. And just keep in mind, an outside consultant's not going to know your process. They're not going to know that machine. So it's imperative, if you have someone come in and help you with your periodic inspections, that they're teamed with a maintenance personnel, someone that knows that process, so that they can work with them to do the periodic reviews. For example, FDR, myself, I do a lot of periodic inspections with clients, but I'm never the authorized person. I always have an authorized employee with me. They actually do the periodic inspection, and I just make sure they're not missing any elements, because I'm not authorized in the facility to do those. So I just help them go through the process to make sure they're not missing any elements of those procedures.
Right. Yeah. And I think that kind of gets to that point. Beware of folks that say they can come in and do them for you. Right. I think that kind of gets to what Tabitha's saying. And as I said, the last bullet point, I think I covered this already, but it's just as a reminder again, that the person, the observer, the inspector can be someone who has previously carried out that procedure, currently carries out that procedure. They work in that department, or they're in maintenance or what have you. It's just that they cannot be implementing the procedure during the inspection, right? And so that was the debate that I had and eventually succeeded in with a compliance officer once I kind of laid that out for them. So it doesn't mean that you can't have someone from the same department or work area that is the observer. It's just they have to be truly observing. They can't be putting the locks on. They can't be pressing the or verifying it or dissipating the energy or what have you, because otherwise, you're essentially taking the test for that person. So, and again, don't miss the point of the periodic inspection. I know I've said this now several times, right? You're in the course of doing it, or your objectives in doing it are make sure that the steps, each and every step in the machine specific procedure is being followed. Make sure that the people who use the procedure understand their responsibilities under the procedure, and make sure that if there is something wrong with the procedure, it doesn't fully control all the energy sources. Perhaps the disconnect there's broken, there's something wrong with the equipment, whatever, any fault, flaw, issue, error, lack of comprehension, etc., is surfaced through the periodic inspection. Make sure that those changes are made so that it does do what it's intended to do. Another common mistake, forgetting one of the 3 steps again that I talked about. So I don't probably beating a dead horse, but I really want to make sure, we were talking as we were preparing for this program. One of the things I like about programs like this is, I know my clients are going to get inspected. We know from the statistics, right, that about 70 to 75% of all inspections result in a citation. So there's a good chance if you report an amputation or if you're visited by OSHA as part of a programmed inspection, there's a good chance you may be cited. But there are so many avoidable citations, and ones that particularly that are I don't want to say easily avoidable, but if you have the knowledge before you're inspected, so you can set out, evaluate your program, ask whether are we doing everything that we should be doing the right way, that you can avoid a citation for inadequate or not doing periodic inspections. So make sure that the inspector is observing a representative sample of the authorized employees who perform the procedure. Make sure that after observing the procedure, that the inspector is reviewing the procedure with each of the employees who are going to be carrying that procedure out, and then prepare a certification form, put it in your files. So if you are inspected, you can, you've got it at the ready. You can provide it to OSHA to show that each of these steps have been followed, and you're on top of it. And frankly, I think because it's such an important step, if OSHA sees that you're doing periodic inspections and you're doing them correctly, it gives them comfort, right? I think they're going to be less concerned about your lockout tagout program. Hopefully that means they're less likely to find errors in the procedures themselves. And I think practically it means hopefully it's less likely that there are going to be accidents or injuries, because folks understand the procedures and they know how to use them. And then the last, 5th and final common mistake is failing to retrain. So under the training portion, under C7, you're required to retrain both authorized and affected employees if there's a change in their job assignments, if there's a change in the machinery or the equipment or the processes, right? You bring in you put a new line, you modify a piece of equipment, you need to retrain. If the procedures change, so you revise the procedure, you added a step to it, or you've taken something out, you need to retrain. And as I said earlier, you need to retrain if in the course of doing a periodic inspection, you realize that there are inadequacies in the employee's understanding of the procedure, or if it turns out that the person is not following the procedure, right? Someone is skipping a step, they're locking out the wrong disconnect, they're not sure where a disconnect is. Any things like that would necessitate retraining. And the purpose then of the retraining obviously is to establish proficiency in the procedure, and that folks understand and can apply either the revised procedure or the work on the new piece of equipment. So it's a quick review of what I think are the 5 most common mistakes or errors that I see with respect to periodic inspections. One of the big issues, and I'm going to hand it off to Tabitha now, is, from a practical standpoint, you've got a large facility, you've got 500 pieces of equipment that need to be locked out. We talked earlier about what you need to do to make sure that you're doing those periodic inspections on an annual basis. It's easy for me to say, right? Because I'm the lawyer. I don't actually have to do them. I'm just I'm giving you the advice on what to do. So there's this probably tendency to come out of a program like this and say, well, how the heck do I do that? because I'm not going to be producing my product because I'm going to be doing periodic inspections. So one of the ways to, one of the things, the key things you can do is group procedures for review. And and I often will bring in Tabitha or other consultants to help clients do that, right? Because can be an intensive process. It requires knowledge of lockout, tagout, of the equipment, and the different questions or criteria that you need to go through in deciding, can we group this procedure or this group of procedures together and review, do one review that will satisfy or as a periodic inspection for all of them. So with that, I'll shut up for a few minutes, and Tabitha, I'll hand it over to you, and I'll just advance the slides.
Perfect, thank you. So like Aaron said, a lot of people have concerns because they have 500 pieces of equipment, and there's absolutely no way that they can do all their periodic reviews in 1 year and still produce product. So a lot of times we come in and help people group procedures, or at least talk them through how to group procedures. So OSHA does allow you to group your lockout tagout procedures because you are not required to write individual procedures for each of your machines, although a lot of facilities do that, which is a great practice, best practice, because then each individual procedure or machine has an individual procedure, but it does not make you have to actually review that procedure. You just have to review the grouping of procedures. So in order to do that, you have to have machines that have the same or similar type of control measures. So the procedural steps for shutting down, isolating, blocking, and dissipating stored energy for a machine or equipment have to be like. The placement, removal, and transfer of lockout devices and the responsibility for them. And then the requirements for testing a machine or equipment to determine and verify the effectiveness of the lockout tagout devices and other control measures have to be similar. So for example, in this, if you have a row of mixing machines and all of their processes are the same, you can actually make those a group, because they're all by shutting them down, and you isolate them in the same manner, and then you apply your lockout devices for each of those machines, even though they may have different disconnects in different areas of the facility, but the process is actually the same. And then you would verify your energy is dissipated in the same manner. So for example, you would go to the stop button, push the stop button, and then you'd go to that disconnect, pull the disconnect, add your lockout device, and then go back to the machine and try to push start to see if that blender or mixer would start. Let's say you have 25 of those, you could group those into one and only review one of those procedures. So instead of reviewing 25, you'd be reviewing one. Next slide, Aaron.
Yep.
Thank you. So grouping when it's appropriate, for example, a woodworking shop, you have multiple table saws, radial arm saws, planers, routers, grinders, and conveyors. Typically, these types of machines have the same mechanism to shut them down, same disconnects, same types of controls to isolate the energy, and then you would have the same steps to verify the energy has been dissipated. There are certain situations when you cannot group your machines, such as when you have one machine that you would have a start button, and then you have another one that is wired directly to an electronic on-demand signal. Signal procedure will not provide adequate guidance on how to effectively shut down the other machine. So ideally what you'd want to be able to do is take one lockout tagout procedure and look at it and say, if the lockout specifics were not on here, but it told me I could go to the machine and I could run through these lockout tagout steps, I could effectively isolate the hazardous energy, then you would know you could group that set of machines together. The other thing you cannot do is if you have different types of energy from the machines. For example, ammonia refrigeration and then natural gas heating. You have different types of hazards within those, so you cannot group those two together. A few things that we typically get asked during periodic inspections, and some of these are going to go back to what Aaron's already discussed, just kind of a reminder. So what does it mean to conduct a periodic inspection at least annually? This is once every 12 months. So if you do yours on January 15th of 2022, then on January 15th of 2023, you better have all of yours done. You don't do it on January 17th of the next year. OSHA is very specific about that. So that is annually. Do we have to inspect all our lockout tagout procedures being conducted on every machine? No. Again, you can group your procedures and machines that have the same or similar types of control measures. I highly recommend, if you're going to do this, which we just discussed, is as you keep some sort of spreadsheet or some sort of log of some sort that says, these are our groupings, and this is how we are going to do our periodic inspections on these groupings every year, so that you can show OSHA that this is how we've grouped them, and this is why we've grouped them. So you have an explanation on why you don't have a periodic review on every single machine. Do we have to inspect lockout tagout procedures being utilized by every authorized employee? No, you can inspect a representative number of employees implementing one procedure within each group of procedures. Again, you do have to let everybody know. What are the requirements if we do not inspect every authorized employee that we will implement the lockout tagout procedure that year? These are where you have to do the supplemental reviews. That will be that for every employee that will implement the lockout tagout procedure to meet the review requirements and reestablish employee procedure responsibility and proficiency. This is where OSHA recommends that you do group meetings. That's directly from the compliance directive. You can do it in any manner you choose, as long as employees have been provided the information.
Tabitha, would you think, for some folks that might be actually observing each and every employee carry out the procedure as opposed to the representative sample, then you would not necessarily have to do that second knowledge check, right? Because you're having that discussion and review with the employee as you're reviewing it. So that secondary review is really kind of a catch to ensure that when you're using the representative sample approach for the observation portion, that everybody is knowledge check is done with everybody, right?
Yes, that's correct. So that's designed for those folks that don't actually do the periodic review with every individually authorized employee. That's designed for more of the, we have 50 employees that are authorized, and we're going to do 20 of those employees instead of all 50 this year. So we're going to have a meeting so we can let the other employees know what we did and make sure they have an understanding and they have an opportunity to ask us questions. It is key. That's a good point to bring up, Aaron. It is key that when you're doing your periodic inspections, that you actually talk to your employees. Don't just go out there with a clipboard and start writing stuff down while they're doing their lockout. It's very important that this is a discussion that you have, that you actually talk to the employee doing the periodic inspection that year. I found over time that sometimes these have been done and people think that periodic inspections kind of go through, watch the employee do their job and see if they do it right and then walk away, versus having a discussion with the employee. And it's important that employees have that conversation, because they may be aware of something in the procedure that's not correct, and they're doing what's correct, but the procedure's not written correctly. And so it may be missed. So it's really important that there's a conversation when you're working. employees.
making sure that the person who is doing the inspection, right? I mean, we said earlier, as I said, the only requirement is that it's an authorized employee. So theoretically, it can be one maintenance employee observing another one doing it. But you want to your point, I think you really want to make sure that the person who's doing it is, able to relate to those employees, right? Able to communicate. There's no language issues. And someone who those employees, it wouldn't be someone, you wouldn't want to have someone who's doing a periodic inspection who is, not a trusted employee or someone who doesn't get along well with others, because I think it just would increase the likelihood that the employee that they're observing is not going to feel comfortable raising a concern with them. I mean, that's the whole, again, a big part of this requirement is the intent is to, or the purpose is to find the problems or the shortcomings in the procedure. So you want employees to feel comfortable and able to communicate with someone like, hey, this doesn't work when I do this, or this procedure isn't effective in this regard, or I don't know where this lockout point is, or what have you. And train, again, there's no requirement that you train the inspectors, but I would certainly want my inspectors to know how to do it, what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do, and particularly what they need to do if problems are observed, so they understand that part of their job is, if knowledge inadequacies are observed or procedure is ineffective for some reason, that they know they need to go to the appropriate person and pass that along. Now, obviously, if you have safety people that are participating in it, or senior or supervisory employees, presumably they know to do that. But that's certainly something I think you want to make sure of as well.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I tell people all the time, if you're doing these periodic reviews and you have quite a few procedures and you're not finding any issues, then you're probably not doing them correctly. At some point, hopefully you are. Hopefully you have zero problems, but it's probably unlikely that the first set of periodic reviews that you do are 100% right. They're probably pretty right, we hope, if they're done correctly, but the likelihood of all your employees having 100% understanding of your lockout tagout procedures is probably not. And then the likelihood of, when you wrote your procedures, that them being 100% correct or something changing in the process and those procedures actually getting changed and updated, it's just the likelihood of that being 100% is just unlikely. And so if you're not finding anything in your periodic reviews, then just, you might want to go back and double check that, because either there's not a conversation going on with those employees, or are you just checking the box? I would just really invite you to dig in and make sure your periodic inspections are doing what they should be doing. I find that a lot when I start asking the questions, is that people aren't really digging into their periodic inspections, and we could have prevented an injury if someone had done that. So I just really encourage you to dig into those and have those discussions with the employees doing the work.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And again, from just to emphasize the byproduct of that is, when I'm participating in or managing inspections where the employer has a highly functioning LOTO program with effective periodic inspections, when you can show that compliance officer, here are the periodic inspections, here's the document confirming that Joe Blow and Susie Smith were retrained when this issue was found, or here's the procedure with the more recent date on it because we updated the procedure based on the periodic inspection. That to me, it's just like you can sense the, like, okay, this is an employer that gets it. This is an employer that's doing the right way. And if there's no proof of retraining and not a single procedure has been revised in the last 5 years, it doesn't mean there's something wrong, but I think it's just it's something you should be thinking about. Maybe you had the best, most qualified folks drafting the procedures, and so that it's not going to be an issue. But I think that is an important point to kind of keep an eye on. If we're not hearing anything, then you might want to kind of almost audit your procedures a little bit and make sure that they're being done correctly.
Okay, so here are some compliance tips. Like we just talked about, if you can group your lockout tagout procedures that are same or similar types of control measures, highly recommend it to reduce the number of periodic inspections you're having to do. Inspect a representative number of employees implementing one procedure within the group. Be sure you're making the sampling representative of the plant servicing and or maintaining operations of the energy control practices for the procedures being inspected. So again, if you have 50 employees, don't just do 5 employees. If you have 50 employees doing lockout tagout, OSHA comes in and they see you've done 5. That's not a representative number. OSHA does not give a percentage. They don't say you should do 10%. They don't say you should do 20%. They don't say you should do 30. There's no number out there, unfortunately. It'd be great if there was. So you're going to have to decide what's reasonable and inspect that number of employees. If the representative sampling, sorry. You're okay. If the representative sampling reveals a procedural problem, you must resolve the deviation with respect to each of the procedures associated with the group. So if you're doing a grouping and you're only going to, let's say, review one of that group of 20 procedures, and you find out that there's a problem with that procedure, you're going to have to go back and correct all of 25 of those procedures. So you need to keep that in mind when you're doing those representative sampling of lockout tagout. This goes back again. We have to ensure that each authorized representative reviews the inspection results from the machine or piece of equipment before performing or servicing maintenance on the machine or piece of equipment. So you can do that via a group meeting, before a daily meeting, however you so choose to communicate that. But you do need to communicate it to the employee before they're allowed to service that piece of equipment again for that year. You should do a more comprehensive review if they're between the inspector and each authorized employee, if there are deviations in the energy control procedure being implemented, or if there's inadequacies in the employee knowledge regarding the energy control procedure. So if you find that your lockout tagout or energy control procedure is not adequate, that it was missing a step, or the employee that was doing the work was missing a step or couldn't find a lockout, you need to make sure you're doing a little bit additional training with that employee or employees doing the work. Both of those can be catastrophic. And this is why we're doing periodic inspections. We want to find these errors before they cause an employee to be injured or killed. Corrective actions, corrective actions need to be instituted, and retraining must be performed when any inspection reveals inadequacies in knowledge. Okay, I'm good. I think I covered both of that. Again, as Aaron talked about before, like he said, attorneys tell you have to certify everything. OSHA will tell you you have to certify everything. So certify that periodic inspections have been performed. Ensure that you include the machine and the equipment that the energy control procedure was used, the date of the inspection, and the name of the employees included in the inspection, the name and the person who performed the inspection. If you're going to do grouping, also include on your periodic inspection what the periodic inspection group it covered. So let's say on your spreadsheet you say this is grouping A of planer saws. You can say this was machine 25 group A. This is what this covered. So that way you can show the inspector that this is how you guys are grouping your machines and that you did your periodic inspection. And you should consider in the next year, for the next 12 months, a different procedure within that group for evaluation.
Yeah, I think that point about kind of documenting the grouping is a really good one. because I rarely see that done. And, you know, we're usually able to explain or convince to the compliance officers doing the inspection that they were appropriately grouped. But, you know, if the procedure or if the document request after the site visit comes in and it's, you know, send us the periodic inspections for, you know, the mechanical press on line 3, and you've inspected the mechanical press on line 4, you know, we send the periodic inspection form for line 4, and it prompts questions, right? And then we have to explain why this should count, you know, looking at this line should count for the other line because they're the same. And this doesn't mean that they won't still question the appropriateness of the grouping, but I think they're less likely to if they see, you know, that there was a plan. And this was an intentional thing, not like we just got lucky that we happened to inspect line 4 and that's the same as line 3. So I think that's a really good suggestion to make sure that the periodic inspection forms themselves make that clear. I think that I think that was it. So it's maybe a record in a Con Maciel OSHA webinar that we basically completed it within the hour, maybe a minute or two past. So let's Tabitha, any closing thoughts before we take questions?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered most of the periodic inspection questions that we typically get.
Right, good. I will check to see if we have any questions. I don't see. We had gotten one question that asked kind of a specialized question that kind of gets into I think the use of tags. The question basically came into a situation where employer has an isolation officer that acts as the authorized employee, so shift supervisor. The authorization is then passed along with shift change. When it's time to take the locks and the tags off of an isolated piece of equipment, which is approved by the isolation officer. Operations employees then remove the locks and the tags using the energy isolation plan as their checklist to ensure that all the locks and tags were off. You know, and this kind of gets into group lockout issues as well. Do you have any thoughts, Tabitha, as far as you know, situations like that, where is it okay to you know, if you're doing an inspection of the procedure, is that a satisfactory approach to a situation like this? And I know we don't want to get into the specifics, but just kind of a high level discussion of that issue.
Yeah, so if they're doing a group lockout and they're using, it sounds like an energy isolation plan of some sort, typically what they need to be doing is, one, they need to have it clearly in their lockout tagout procedures that how they're going to do this. Secondly, they need to, it sounds like maybe they're using like an operations lock with a single key that's keyed the same. They would need to be sure that they have a clear understanding of who owns the locks. And if it's like an operations lock, and if it's group lockout, they would need to be sure, like if one person places those locks, they can place those operations lock that are keyed the same, and then that key would be put in a box, and then a personal lock would need to be put on that, and then that person would own that, obviously that lock, and then anybody working on that would need to place their keys, their keys in a lock box, and then add, and then that lock box would be locked, and then therefore there would be ownership over that. So everybody technically would have a personal lock applied, so everybody would have safety there. That would be a primary authorized employee that would own that. So then that work group would be, someone would verify on behalf of that work group, and they would have to have the right to verify each of those lockout points on their own as well. And then if there was going to be a shift change, they would have to have a process in place to go back, and they would have to change that personal lock that holds the operations lock, and they would have to have it clearly communicated that that person would take their personal lock off and then put the other lock on. So then they would have ownership over it. So if they needed to remove those locks, they could do so.
Needless to say, a complicated process that we probably can't fully address here, but I think it kind of gives some flavor to the complexity of that, of issues like that. I mean, I certainly find that you know, for those employers that have solid lockout tagout programs, that I think group LOTO is one area where, you know, there's again, you know, multiple, kind of the old story, like too many cooks in the kitchen. It just, you know, increases the likelihood of an issue or something falling through the cracks. If folks, you know, if you haven't fully trained and really gotten the additional requirements that go with group LOTO in place. So, you know, and I think that kind of ties into another issue as far as that I've seen come up a fair amount or a number of times in inspections in the past year, growing emphasis on what OSHA refers to as the forgotten shift. So don't forget to do periodic inspections on second and third shift, and really kind of make sure that you know, even if you've got a well-oiled machine on first shift or second shift, you know, the overnight shift is locking out, is aware of those requirements. That's an area that OSHA, I think, is going to be focusing on more. And we've seen here in Region 5 local emphasis programs that are going to be focusing on sanitation and you know, other areas, I think, where lockout, you know, is perhaps not done as effectively or as consistently as it might be with maintenance or with the operators who do it on a frequent basis. So just a few other thoughts. I don't see any other questions that have come in. So unless there's anything else, it doesn't appear that there is. So we will wrap it up at this point. Thank you again for everybody. We had a nice size audience join us today. I hope you all found this to be helpful. Got some tips and some pointers to take back to your establishments and tighten up periodic inspections. So if and when you're next inspected by OSHA, you'll have a rock solid periodic inspection set of documents to produce, and that inspection will go well. So as always, don't hesitate to give us a call, and the materials will be distributed. The PowerPoint will be made available. We're going to update that to include Tabitha's bio and contact information if you all want to talk to her about your periodic inspections, your LOTO program, or anything else. So thank you again, everybody, and have a good and safe rest of your week. Thank you.